Hello and welcome back to Geraldo's Workshop, where I post some of the do-it-yourself projects that I find myself doing at home or at work or sometimes for other people. I'm often surprised at the kind of adventurous jobs that I find myself getting into. Some are small, some big. Whether it's carpentry, masonry, electrical, computers, or hobbies like my model trains, I enjoy getting to the root of the issue, coming up with a solution, then rolling up my sleeves and jumping into a good project. You know, I don't actually have a workshop. I take my tools to the location of the project and set up shop right there. So, where do you think we'll find Geraldo's workshop this time? This is Project 25.3, the IT Guy's Model Train Layout, Episode 1, Project Introduction. In this episode, we begin the long journey towards building a 285-foot long train layout in my living room. We used to have a 45-foot loop between the exposed beams in the ceiling of our home in Stone Mountain. My children really enjoyed it. When we ran the Alco PAs and 5 passenger cars, I remember that it was just really loud, but they loved it. It's been a little over 25 years since we moved from Stone Mountain, and sadly, my trains have been in storage during this time. They only get to see the light at the end of the tunnel when I pull one out to show to a friend. Finally, we get to begin this project. So the plan was hatched shortly after moving into the new house. This is going to be a layout on a shelf about 7 feet high. The trains will run through the living room, the dining room, the kitchen. They'll run through a few mouse holes in the pantry, on through the coffee bar, down the hall, and then back into the living room. There are 2 main loops with a few short sidings and 2 long sidings in an industrial area. The idea is to run my wife's Blue Comet passenger train on the inside loop, and then run my monster coal train, which is a pair of Norfolk Southern Dash 8s and 44 coal cars. This train will be about 50 feet long. So the idea is that you never see both ends of the train at the same time. We also have a general, and it's going to be running a couple of gondola cars, and they'll have a few crates in it that'll back up onto a siding for a textile mill. And occasionally we'll park the coal train and run a couple of the CSX SD60s with a construction consist on the freight loop instead. In order to have a good idea of the scope of the project, it was necessary to plan out the layout in a track planning software. Now there's some really good tools out there, and I'm not going to name a bunch of them here, but I chose AnyRail for this particular project. I started in version 6, and since I've upgraded to version 7, and you can see some of this progress on the Ross Custom Switches website. There's a link on the RCS homepage and one right up here. The plan has been through several iterations. Some of the turns were just too tight for the equipment that we want to run. We found some pipes in the wall where we were going to run some mouse holes through there, and there were a few other considerations. So the latest plan takes all of this into account, clears up some of those issues, and we should be able to get started with what we have. Since the layout's going to be high up on a shelf, the tracks closest to the wall are going to be elevated so that we can see the trains that are in the back. There will be a section of track where both the main loops are going to be on the same level. And in this particular location, we're going to put a Ross double crossover. That'll keep our rails at 4.5 inches on center. We'll be able to use 072 and 084 curves and give plenty of room for the Madison cars on the Blue Comet and the coal trains that we're going to be running on a regular basis. Some of the flat cars that I have are pretty long also for the construction train. So we want to make sure that we have wide enough turns all the way around to accommodate all of that equipment that we're going to run. Speaking of Ross Custom Switches, they are sponsors for this and other projects here on Geraldo's Workshop. Ross Custom Switches manufactures the highest quality turnouts in the industry, hands down. Featured today is the Ross Ready 202 right hand and the 203 left hand yard crossovers. These are Premier Line switches which are built the same quality as the RCS Superline switches, but they're built to scale, which means they generally have longer turnouts and more gradual than some of the space-saving Superline products. ROS Ready means that these switches are pre-wired. They can also be ordered with the DZ100 switch machines. These turnouts are designed to give you 3.5-inch centers for moving equipment from main lines onto sidings or for moving equipment in a train yard. So, continue to watch Project 25.3 to see more ROS Custom Switches products featured. Click on the notification bells to receive a ping when we upload new videos. Take a minute to tell us about your layout in the comments below. Tell us what equipment that you're going to be running. If you have questions about this or other products, please let me know, or you can contact Steve at ROS Custom Switches. The contact information is at rosswitches.com. There's a link in the description below, and there's a link up above here. Now, back to Project 25.3, Episode 1. So I decided to start in a coffee bar. The benchwork here is 12-inch shelf board. I'm using some standard shelf brackets, but I'm using those inverted so that we can hide them in the scenery. I tried a few options in hanging the shelves, and I finally landed on this one. Since we'll be using foam board to lay the track on, placing the shelf brackets upside down will leave the bottom of the shelf appearing clean. And the final benchwork will have molding underneath where it meets the wall to provide a finishing touch. So we're setting up here for a dry fit and to test the placement of the shelf brackets. This installation went really well, with a few exceptions. The shelf brackets were not exactly square. This might require some tweaking in order to use them for our intended purpose. Also, hanging this 9-foot section was a little unwieldy, so I'll take it down, paint it before I put it back up, and make sure I get some good help. We need to rotate the shelf brackets 90 degrees to fully hide them when we lay down the track and apply the scenery. The shelf board meets up with the bookshelf in the coffee bar. By the way, the bookshelf and window seat is covered in Project 23.12, Mrs. Diego's Christmas present. I'll be posting a video about that project a little later. Where the shelf board and the bookshelf meet, I'll use a piece of 5mm Luan plywood to make that transition between those two pieces. And the application of the foam board will ensure that the track is level and smooth. Well, that should wrap it up for Episode 1. Stay tuned for more in this project, which will probably last a couple of years. We'll see you next time on Geraldo's Workshop.